Good afternoon, all. It is our very good pleasure. Dr. Subra Prakash Mondal is with us today in the recent trending imaging memory and devices, recent trending analytics and devices, AICT sponsor short-term training program. Dr. S.P. Mondal obtained his master's degree in physics in 2003 from Vidyasagar University, West Bengal. He received his PhD in 2010 from Department of Physics, IIT Kharagpur. After completion his doctoral research work, he joined as a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Chemistry at Ohio State University, USA. He worked in the area of nitric oxide sensor for the direction of asthma in collaboration with the US Space Agency, NASA. At Ohio State University, he successfully demonstrated the selective detection of the low-level nitric oxide below 5 ppb in human breath using the sensor arrays. A startup company in California, Spirosure, has licensed this technology and developed a handheld device which will have a major impact on future asthma diagnosis. Presently, he is an assistant professor at the Department of Physics, NIT Agartala, since November 2012. Dr. Mondal published 47 international journals, co-invented 3 US patents. He attended more than 20 international conferences in India and abroad. He is a co-author of 2 book chapters and 1 book based on his research work. His current research interest includes the fabrication of highly sensitive selective random sensor for biomedical application. His another area of research interest is to fabricate high-efficiency photovoltaic device using semiconductor nanotechnology. His research group is also involved in functionalized semiconductor nanostructure for photodetectors, on-board memory devices, etc. He was awarded University Silver Medal for being second position in Masters. He received CSR UGC Fellowship from Government of India, Teaching Scholar Fellowship from Ohio State University, USA, Institute Postdoctoral Fellowship from IIT Kharagpur, and many more. He received First Young Scientist Fellowship in 2012 from the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. With this short biography, I like to request Dr. Mondal to take the session. Dr. Mondal, please.
So thank you, Dr. Panda. First, I would like to thanks for inviting me this AICT sponsored seminars.
Full computer. At the bottom, share screen option is there.
Actually, that's symbol gone. Okay, let me join again. Yeah. So
share screen and put the whole thing, whatever is coming. Okay, make it okay.
So this. So now it is shared.
No, it's not coming.
Now can you see that?
No. Yeah, please unmute yourself. Yes, you can start now.
So yeah, so I am very sorry about this problem. So okay, so Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So today I will start my lecture on nanomaterials-based sensors for health monitoring applications. So, yeah, I am Dr. Subra Prakash Mondol, Assistant Professor from Department of Physics, National Institute of Technology, Agartala. So here are my talk summary. So first I will discuss a little bit about nanotechnology. Already all of you are familiar with nanotechnology, but I will brief in details. So now different kind of nanomaterials then I will discuss. So then there are synthesis and applications. So after that we will discuss about use of nanomaterials for health monitoring applications. Now then different kind of sensors. Now sensors for a particular health monitoring, and we will focus for breath monitoring, basically nitric oxide sensors as and glucose sensors for diabetes monitoring. So and then summary and conclusion. So here actually in 1959 the Richard Feynman told that in a meeting at Caltech. So there's a plenty room at the bottoms. So that means if we go in the molar dimensions, so we can get a lot of interesting phenomena and lot of interesting physics over there. So means almost 100 years ago. So Michael Faraday, in fact, he started nanotechnology. So here you can see. So this is Michael Faraday. Actually, he prepared some colloidal nanoparticles. In fact, that colloidal gold nanoparticles at Royal Institutions in England, and still those nanoparticles are stable. So actually, Michael Faraday didn't know what he made. So means earlier days, those kind of nanoparticles are used to decorate different glasses in churches and different windows of king and or rich peoples. So, but now after the invention of electron microscopes, we have learned what Michael Faraday did at the time. So yeah, just some for basic introductions here. I want to show this diagram. So in fact, nanomaterials deals with the materials which have dimensions below 100. Actually, there is no strict dimensions, but basically quantum confinement effect, we will discuss later, that generally dominates below 100 for most of those materials. Now, if we look here, water molecules is around 0.1 nanometers, carbon nanotubes in 5 nanometer diameters. So next, why these nanomaterials are interesting? Because it's faster means, so if you make some semiconductor device using nanomaterials, those are very small, but those are very fast, means the electron flow inside the nanomaterials are very fast. That's why our device will be very fast. So, and lighter, obviously it's lighter because it takes very small space and cheaper. And another advantage is, if we make nanomaterials, its electrical and optical property changes. So these are the basic physics behind behind the nanomaterials. So for a three-dimensional case, here we have plotted the density of states. So basically, density of states is the number of electronic states per unit volume. This is how electrons are distributed in a materials. But if you reduce the dimensions, so suppose if you reduce one dimension, so electrons can move in two dimensions. Suppose if you reduce in z directions, so electrons can only move x and y directions, and its density of state will be looks like this, step-like structures. So now, interestingly, it's independent of time. independent of energy, and it looks like a state. But for a one dimension means only if you allow electrons to move either X or Y or Z directions, then it changes and it varies 1 by root over e to the power half. So 1 by root over e. And for a zero dimension means quantum dots, it's just like a delta functions. So what is quantum confinement? So in case of bulk materials, there is no confinement. That means electrons or holes or the carriers, means quantum confinement can occur in other systems also, like phonons and other systems, excitons. So in case of bulk, so there is no restrictions and at the dimensions, so electrons can move freely X, Y, and Z directions. But in case of two dimensions, so electrons can only move two directions, and it was first observed in semiconductor materials. And for one dimensions, that is for quantum wires, so it can move one directions, and zero dimensions, almost all carriers are confined in a particular regions, means there is no, in fact, free carriers. So due to the confinement effect, we can see lots of interesting properties of materials. So suppose here I have given one example. So here you see some people holding on gold. So gold is a very precious material for us because it's emit beautiful color. So why it's emit beautiful color? Because it has plenty of electrons over there, and when electromagnetic waves fall on it, those electron vibrates and it emits electromagnetic radiations. That emission is in that yellow region. So that's why we can see gold as yellow. But interestingly, so if you reduce the dimension of gold, suppose if you make a gold nanoparticle which is 5 to 10 nanometers, its color changes. Now here you see, we can see, so this is the gold nanoparticles. So, but they have different in colors. So red colors and pink colors based on the dimensions. So here are some beautiful gold nanoparticles are there, and here silver is generally white, but you see the silver nanoparticle colors, those are in yellow and some pink regions. So these happenings due to the electron distributions of those particular materials. Now, in case of semiconductor quantum dots, so not only electrons, so in a metal quantum dot, only electrons are confined at different directions, but in semiconductor quantum dots, electrons as well as holes are confined. So that's why it's created a band gap. Now you see here we have some cadmium selenide nanoparticles or quantum dots. Its dimension from 2 nanometer to 8 nanometers, and you see the excellent colors. Its colors changes from red to blue regions. So why it's happening? This is happening due to the quantum confinement, because at zero dimensions, so those quantum dots are basically zero dimensions, and electron in that dimension, electrons holes are confined, and due to the confinement, its energy changes. So here the band gap energy of cadmium selenide for bulk cadmium selenide. Now, if a dimension reduces, then energy levels for electrons and holes, they are splitted, and the effective energy gap increases. So this is the energy gap for a cadmium selenide quantum dot. Now, if you look at this brass equations, so this is the band gap, resultant band gap of those cadmium selenides. Now this is EB for bulk band gap materials. Now these terms H square by 8 r square into 1 by m e stars plus 1 by m h stars. So that is for confinement energy. And third term is Coulombic repulsive energy. So this quantum confinement energy depends on 1 by r square. That means if your dimensions is reduced, then confinement energy increases. So that's why we can get the band gap enhancement for a smaller semiconductor nanoparticles. Here you see some TM image for a cadmium selenide quantum dots. So these small dots are cadmium atoms, and here this is the absorption spectra. And interestingly, for 17 angstrom, that means 1.7 nanometer quantum dot, this is this violet color, and here 15 nanometers quantum dot. So this is a red shifted. So if you reduce the size, this is blue shifted. So that's the interesting phenomena of a for if we reduce the dimension of a nanomaterials. Now we are discussing about two-dimensional nanomaterials. That means here here electrons or carrier can only move x and y directions, not in z directions. So that here we have put some examples of various kind of two-dimensional materials, that is boron nitride, molybdenum disulfide, tungsten sulfide, gallium selenide, molybdenum oxide, tungsten oxides, gallium selenide. So those are the two-dimensional nanomaterials. Now most interesting nanomaterials, that is the graphene. So this is just a sheet of carbon hexagonal carbon layers. So this is some model for graphene structures. So here are TM image, transmission electron micrographs image for different two-dimensional nanomaterials. Now here are some micrographs of one-dimensional nanomaterials. This is hexagonal zinc oxides, and this is silicon nanowire. So here only carriers can moves only these directions only. One means vertical directions only. These are the one-dimensional carbon nanostructures. Interestingly, so carbon is interesting materials, and you see, so if you have a sheet of carbon, but hexagonal carbon papers, that is graphene, but if you roll it, then we can get one-dimensional carbon nanotubes. So this is a single wall carbon nanotube. Now this is multi-wall. Multi-wall means it consists of several single walls. So here are the TM image for the multi-wall carbon nanotubes. So those lines are different kind of different carbon layers. So interestingly, if you cut carbon nanotube, you can get a graphene. Now, how you can grow nanomaterials? In fact, you can grow nanomaterials in two ways. One is called bottom up, and another is top down approach. So bottom first, what is top down? Top down means you have some bulk materials, but if you cut it into smaller pieces, then you can get nanoparticles. So how you can do that? So here there are different process. So one process is sputtering. Sputtering means you have to do that experiment in high vacuum conditions. So you have a target. Suppose if you want to make silicon nanoparticles or silicon dots, so you have to take a silicon target, and you have to bombard those silicon target with some high energy atoms like argon atoms. So and that argon atoms will take silicon atoms, and you can get silicon nanoparticles. Now chemical etchings, you can make nanostructures, laser ablations. Now ball milling, that is another interesting method to get a nanoparticles, even means commercially also people nanoparticles using these ball milling methods. So there is a drum, and inside the drum you can put your bulk materials. Now there are some balls are there. Balls are made of metals and non-corrosive metals, and when the drum will rotate, so there is a lot of frictions between your different balls, and in between the balls those materials will grind, and it will it becomes smaller particles. Now in case of bottom-up approach, so here you can make different kind of nanomaterials, and you have a better control. So these methods are atomic or molecular condensations, vapor depositions, soil gel process, spray pyrolysis process, electrochemical deposition. So those are the bottom up process. Means here you can get the nanomaterials by adding atom by atoms and molecule by molecules. So now I just give a brief introductions how we can get quantum dots. So here some experimental arrangement. So how you can get a cadmium selenide quantum dot. In fact, cadmium selenide is very interesting materials. So it has a strong absorptions in visible regions, as we have seen earlier. Means it's red to blue regions. So it's highly fluorescent. So we can use this kind of quantum dots for biological tagging or for light emitting diodes and solar cells also. So how you can make that? So first you take so TOPO cadmium sulfide, cadmium, that is one long chain molecules, trioctyl phosphine oxides, and you mix with TOP, that is trioctyl phosphine selenium, and you heat it, and we can get cadmium selenide nanoparticles. So I can show you on video. So here, so they generally use some selenium solutions. So now they heat that precursor. So that's a very easy process. And but we have to be sure, we have to do that experiment in inadequate atmosphere, because TOPO and TOP is very reactive and in normal gas conditions. So here you see under ultraviolet light that quantum dots emits different colors due to the presence of different kind of different size of nanoparticles. So now we can also make gold nanoparticles using use acid. You can get gold nanoparticles. So that is a similar process you can do. Next, we'll discuss about growth of two-dimensional nanomaterials. So two-dimensional nanomaterials, most attractive two-dimensional nanomaterials is graphene.
Subra, hello. Your voice is
Hello.
Please
So,
switch off your video, then you can get better bandwidth. If you please switch off your video, then you can get better bandwidth. Means your voice is breaking, maybe network issue is there. Yeah, please continue. Please continue.
okay. So this is the graphene, how we can make a two-dimensional nanomaterials. Now, two-dimensional nanomaterials, suppose graphene can make some chemical depositions. So here, first you have to take copper foil or copper plate, then you have to flow the methane gas. So that is the carbon source, and at high temperature, the carbon will deposit on copper foil or copper sheets, and due to the lattice matching, it's formed graphenes. And after that, we have to etch carbons, and we can get free standing graphene layers. So this is that CVD furnace. So, but in fact, graphene was made by that Andrei Game and Novoshelov by another but easiest method. So that is called mechanical exploration methods. So in this method, just you take a graphite high crystalline graphite. You just put a Scotch tape, and then take it out, take it layer by layer, so you can get that graphene. So in fact, why it's happening? Because graphite is consisted of different monolayers of carbons, hexagonal carbon layers, and they have some pi bonding. So as pi is a very weak bonding, if you apply a force in between them, so they easily detach from other layers. So here I want to show one video. So this is highly crystalline graphite. They put it on the Scotch tape. Now now then they put it on silicon dioxide substrates. And in the silicon dioxide substrates, some graphene layer stick on that substrates. And so this is one layer, this is a monolayer, and that is multi-layer. This is monolayer graphene, and this is a multi-layer graphene. That's why its color changes. So chemically, we can also grow graphene. That is actually in chemical explorations, we get reduced graphene oxide. That means first you take a graphite plate, you reduce it, and you can get graphene oxides. So, and then if you, first you oxidize it, then you can graphene oxides. And if you reduce the graphene oxide in sodium borohydride, or if you annihilate in hydrogen atmospheres, then you can get reduced graphene oxides. But chemically grown graphene is less conductive due to a lot of contaminations and some oxygen atoms on it. So this is not highly conducting, but this is less cost effective. And the reduced graphene oxide have several applications in sensors and as well as energy applications. So for synthesis of one-dimensional nanomaterials, there are various kind of process. So template assisted growth. So this is one of interesting methods. And another is vapor liquid solid growth. So vapor solid growth and some chemical growth. In template assisted growth, we have some template and it has beautiful pores. And if you fill the pores, then you can get one-dimensional nanomaterial such as nanowires, nanotubes. So there are lots of templates available in the market, but porous alumina templates is more attractive. So porous alumina template is nothing but aluminium, made of aluminium. So this is a structure schematic diagram of porous alumina template. So if you take aluminium foil, just you anodize it, and if you can get beautiful hexagonal pores. So this is the pore. They are the pore, and this is the back aluminium, and this is aluminum oxide layers. So this is attractive because excellent periodicity of pores, high pore density, and uniform hexagonal pore size, and pore diameters and pore depth can be varied electrochemical methods. Obviously, this is insulating and optically transparent because aluminum oxide has a high band gap. So that's why it can use in different kind of optoelectronic, as a template of different kind of optoelectronic devices. So suppose aluminum oxide is a band gap around 4 electron volts. So now if you deposit, suppose cadmium selenide nanowires, so cadmium selenide has a band gap suppose 1.7 electron volt. So light can easily pass through that aluminum oxides, and absorption and emissions for cadmium sulfide selenides will not be affected. So this is the fabrication of porous alumina process. So to fabricate porous alumina, first we have to take some aluminum foil. Now you need a pre-treatment because in aluminum foil there is lots of contaminations on the surface. So you need pre-treatments in hydrogen fluorides, nitric oxides, and HCl solutions. You have to clean the surface impurities. Then you have to annihilate at nitrogen atmospheres, because if you annihilate, then you can get large crystalline grain. And if you have a large crystalline grain, then that order of pore would be higher. That means you can get oil hexagonal pores in large area. Then you have to electropolish it. So if you electropolish it, so you can get an atomic finish surface. Now this electropolished aluminum foil you have to use for anodization process. So this would be used as a anode, and platinum wires can be used as a cathodes. So just you take electrochemical cells, and here you take some acids such as sulfuric acid, oxalic acid, or hydrochloric acid, and you anodize it at a particular voltage, you will get a beautiful hexagonal pore. So this is a cross-sectional image of a porous alumina templates. Now you see this is the parallel channels of porous alumina. This is the backsides. Now here the another template, so they have etched the backside pores and you can get a through-hole pores. So because we need through-hole pores for DC electrochemical depositions. Now, just using electrochemical method, you can deposit various kind of materials, semiconductor materials, and various kind of metals inside the pores. So here, some wires grown in alumina templates, metal nanowires grown in alumina templates. So here some tin nanotubes grown in alumina, porous alumina templates. So this method is very easy and as well as low cost. Now, another attractive methods, and that is means people using this for device applications, that is called vapor liquid solid growth methods. In the nanowires grown by alumina templates, that is very cheap, but as is grown in chemical process, there are lots of impurity inside the nanowires. So for electronic devices, it's not good, because so we need a pure nanowires, and high pure nanowires can be grown by vapor liquid solid growth process. And high crystalline and impurity free nanowires can be grown by vapor liquid solid growth process. So how you can grow that? So first you have to take a substrate. You have to deposit some gold nanoparticles. Then you flow some gas. Suppose if you want to make silicon nanowires, you flow silicon silane gas. So silane gas consists of silicons. So those silane, that silicon will absorb by that liquid, and it makes at high temperature, it makes that liquid alloy droplets. And if more and more that silicons goes in that gold liquid, after when it becomes super saturated, and after certain times it start eject the silicons. So here it start ejecting. So and we get a nanowires. So this is the binary phase diagram for gold and silicons. So and the major characteristics of this kind of nanowires is the presence of gold catalyst at the top of the nanowires. So this is the TM transmission electron micrograph image of silicon nanowires. So here I can show one interesting video for growth of silicon nanowires. So, so this slide is taken from University of Cambridge. So interestingly, you can see so live video for how we can grow, how the nanowires are grow, use of gold catalysts. So to grow carbon nanotubes, we have to use some other, suppose iron metal catalyst. Now this is some simply experimental process. So you just take a furnace. Here you take either you can take silicon, germanium, or or some materials which you want to make nanowires. So you have to take the powders, then you heat it at very high temperatures. Before that, you make a gold thin film. So this is a gold thin film deposited on silicon substrates. Now you put it on that substrates. So when you heat it, so that you can get the nanowires. So here, Village grown germanium nanowires, so that white color is the gold nanoparticles. But these nanowires are too long, then they fall on each others. So it's a messy structures. So here you see some well organized nanowires, and this right side image here, they remove the gold, because if you want to use these kind of silicon nanowires for electronic devices, you should remove this gold, because gold can change the Fermi energy of your materials. So that's why you have to remove the gold. And here excellent well organized silicon nanowires for device applications. Now, so briefly, I am discussing some applications of different nanomaterials. So obviously, nanomaterials are attractive for optoelectronic devices such as solar cells, so lasers. So in solar cells, your materials, if you use nanomaterials, you can your solar cells. So suppose in case of silicon solar cell is efficiency is very less, and another disadvantage of silicon solar cell is this is photo absorption. So silicons and this is not flexible. This is silicon is very hard, and it's very expensive. But if you use some quantum dot based solar cells or dye sensitized solar cells, then it is very cheap, very low cost, and you can make it flexible. So nanowire based lasers. So here some nanowires. So each nanowires can shows the lasing effects. So you can use nanowires as a phototransistors, as a photodetectors. Obviously, light emitting diodes you can use using nanomaterials. So basically, for as suppose cadmium sulfide, cadmium selenide, quantum dots, those can be used for a light emitting diodes. Now, different dimensional nanomaterials can also be used as a biosensors. So here, FET-based biosensor. So here, this is a nanowire-based, silicon nanowire-based FET, and they functionalize with some biomaterials. Now, basically, we have to measure the conduction percent time. So when some biomolecules or some virus or bacteria, they incident on those nanowires, its conductivity changes, and we can get the sensor response. So some carbon-based quantum dot can be used for bioimaging. So here they have used some carbon-based quantum dots for tagging some cells. Suppose if you have some effective cells, you can tag those cells and you can image outside from your body. So here there is a mouse, and these red colors, those are the affected cells, and that cells can be observed from the fluorescence image of those carbon quantum dots. So obviously we can use different kind of nanomaterials for gas sensors for various applications. Now another kind of sensor, that is electrochemical sensors, we can use with different materials, nanomaterials. Now, nanomaterials have other application too. So suppose we can, if you coat some titanium dioxide nanoparticles on your screen, then it is highly hydrophobic. So that is so if you look at this window of this car, and here this is a water, due to the surface tensions, water molecules can stick on the surface. But if you coat some hydrophobic titanium dioxide nanoparticles, then there is no water stick on the surface. So now that can different kind of nanomaterials like graphene composites can be used for energy storage. So now, and recently we are using some nanoparticle based ink for printed electronics. So here some conductive inks based on silver nanoparticles. So at present, all you know, so this is COVID-19 that changed our day-to-day life. So people are also working different kind of concepts to protect those virus. So here the silver nanoparticles, so people use silver nanoparticles, or recently copper nanoparticles. Those nanoparticles have antiviral effect. That means, so if the virus fall on those nanoparticles, so they will die and they will not affect our body. So there are some commercial company, they coated some silver or copper nanoparticles on face mask, so to protect from virus. So now we'll discuss about sensor for health monitoring applications. So here we have, in day-to-day life, we have different disease and different health parameter we have to measure, such as blood oxygen levels. So here you see this is a pulse oximeter. So here this is basically optical based sensors. So using pulse oximeter, you can measure your blood oxygen saturations. So now glucometers, using glucometer, you can get the value of glucose concentrations in your blood. Now from the automatic blood pressure monitor, you can get blood pressures. So those sensors are useful for to monitor our health. So recently, people are also working on different kind of sensors. So suppose here that is smart contact lens. So that can be used to detect glucose concentrations from our tears. So now here integrated sensors array to detect glucose from sweats. And this is a graphene based tooth sensors that can detect various bacteria in our mouth. So here are the classifications of different nanometer space sensor. That is optical nanosensors. So here this optical nanosensors works on the absorption and emissions spectroscopy of the nanomaterials, or light scatterings, or changing refractive index. Now for biological nanosensors, so from antibody or antigen interactions, we can detect it from DNA interactions and enzyme-based interactions. And for chemical nanosensors, it's basically detect that from the chemical compositions, molecular concentrations, and pH levels. And physical nanosensors, this kinds of sensor detects the physical parameter like pressures, vibrations, force, mass, and viscosity. So basically, we are interested in chemical sensors. So that means, so when some chemical compositions on the surface of the nanomaterials or it changes, then we can get some response, either electrical response or some or means in terms of current, or in terms of resistance, or in terms of potentials, we can detect. So there are two kinds of sensors. One is for health monitoring, one is invasive, and another is non-invasive. So suppose if we want to measure, in the earlier slide, you see this is the standard glucometer we use in our day-to-day life. So we have to, for that purpose, there is a needle. We just put it in our fingers, and we collect the blood, and we can put the blood on some sensor strips. So these are the sensor strips, and we get the glucose concentrations. So these sensors are invasive in nature. That means it's a painful, and it takes your blood. So but if we use, but we are interested for a non-invasive sensing. So basically, non-invasive sensing. What is non-invasive sensing? Sensors. So devices that do not require biofluids obtained by penetrating the body, as by incisions or injections. So it has several advantages, because there is no pain, and for newborn baby, we can use this technology, because if you measure the blood glucose concentration for a newborn baby, so each time you have to take blood from his body, so it's a very painful, and it is attractive for real-time monitor sensing. So there are several companies like Apple's or Samsung's or other smartphone companies. They are working on this technology for non-invasive sensor. So this is the Apple Watch. So this Apple Watch can detect your pulse rate, but yeah, it can't detect blood glucose and other parameters. So now we'll discuss about breath analysis. So breath analysis, this is a non-invasive technique to detect different parameters or of our body. So in our human breath, there are lots of hundreds of volatile organic compounds. We can emit it. So suppose here I have given a list. Suppose ethane and pentane, and each organic volatile compounds carries a fingerprint of different kind of disease. So, suppose in earlier days, actually, people or we can feel it in our day-to-day life. Suppose if you have a small bad smell, so some people guess that okay, you have some indigestion problems. So, but in that smell, there are hundreds of, or more than hundreds of volatile organic compounds are there, and if we can categorically detect each volatile organic compounds, we can get your health conditions easily. But the task is not very simple. So now I have shown some different volatile organic compounds. This is most important volatile organic compounds, suppose ethane and pentane. So if ethane and pentane, so these chemicals emits from our body. So if increases, then we have some oxidative stress. So methylated hydrocarbons, lungs or breast cancers. So hydrocarbons, especially ethane and pentane, it's a signature of oxidative strain. So isoprene, so if it is increases more than, for healthy persons, it is generally 22 to 34 parts per billion. But if it is increased beyond 234 parts per billion, then you have a problem with cholesterol metabolism. So acetone. So suppose, so acetone is range is up to 2,700 parts per billion, and if acetone concentration is more than that, so you are affected with diabetes mellitus or ketonemia. So similarly, in case of nitrogen containing compound like ammonia, diethylamine, triethylamine, this is uremia and kidney impairment. So not only these organic volatile organic compounds present in our breath, there are other gas molecules like carbon dioxide, we emit in our exhale breath, and carbon monoxides, carbon dioxides, and nitric oxides we also emit. Now we will discuss about the nitric oxide and asthma. So in fact, nitric oxide in our has a very important roles in our human body, and generally in case of normal epithelial cells, it's released small amount of nitric oxide. So this is our lungs, and these are the epithelial cells. So here it's produced nitric oxides, and if nitric oxide production is more, there is also limiting value is 20 parts per billion. We will discuss that. So it indicates the airway inflammations, and in case of this gap will decrease. And when there is a airway inflammations and we have asthma and we get breathing problems. So this is a very serious disease and it causes death. So the major goal is to detect, so we have to detect early in this kind of disease. So that's why we have to make such kind of sensors, so by which we can get whether your nitric oxide conditions are increasing or not. So here, so the increase of nitric oxide concentrations in exhale breath is a clear indication of asthma. And if we can develop a inexpensive, portable, lightweight, and handheld sensors, so that can be useful to physician as well as patients. So now this is the FeNO. So what is FeNO? FeNO means fractional exhale nitric oxides. That means that emitted nitric oxides in our exhale breath, and for adult it's less than 25 parts per billion, and intermediate is 25 to 50. But if it is more than 50 parts per billion, then you are affected with asthma. And for children is 20 to 35, but it is more than 35, then you are affected to asthma. So you have to consult with your doctors. Now, there are different technology we can make nitric oxide sensor. So another thing I would like to mention that, so lots of people they monitor the vehicle pollutions, and they go to some pollution persons, so that they detect the pollution from your vehicles, and basically they measure the carbon monoxide and nitric oxide emitted from vehicles. In case of combustion engine, so it's also produce nitric oxides, but that nitric oxides concentration is very, very high. That is in parts per million range. But in your breath, the nitric oxide concentration is very, very less in parts per billion range. So your sensor should be very, very sensitive. So sensitive compared to that combustion engine sensors. So available technique, chemiluminescence methods. So already there are some available techniques by which we can detect nitric oxide concentrations in our human breath. So that is called chemiluminescence method. So in these methods, nitric oxide react with ozone, and ozone make it nitrogen dioxide in excited state. And when that nitrogen dioxide comes to the ground state, it's emit photons, and that photon can be detected with photomultiplier tubes, and that emitted photons is proportional to, so there is a calibration curve between emitted photons and concentration of nitric oxides. So here, this is nitric oxide from G-Sense. So G-Sense. So earlier it was from G. So this is, but problem is this kind of sensor, this is very expensive and very bulky. So our goal, we have to make a handheld, low cost, means nitric oxide sensors, which can be used for breath monitoring application. So it is very expensive and very difficult to use for us, because for poor country. Now another technology is transistor based device, Schottky diodes, electrochemical sensors, organic field effect transistor based device, and nanowires and nanotube based device. So until now there is no device comes out with based on nanotechnology, but people are working hard on that technology. So I think in future we will get that kind of sensors, nitric oxide sensor for breath monitoring. So here we'll discuss in brief about nitric oxide sensors for breath monitoring applications. So this is basically a potentiometric sensor. That means it gives the potentials when nitric oxide interacts with those sensors. So this is a schematic diagram. It has two electrodes and it's made of YSG. That means yttria stabilized zirconia. This is a ceramic based materials. This is called solid state electrolyte, and also this kind of materials used in fuel cells. So already we are familiar with hydrogen cars, and these materials used in those hydrogen cars. And when nitric oxide interacts, so it gives some potentials. In the right side, you see this is a two sensor array. That means if we add two this kind of sensors, the potentials will increase. So here, this is platinum electrodes, and on the platinum electrode, we have coated some platinum nanoparticles coated zeolite. So that is a catalyst, and in the other electrode, they are used some tungsten oxide. And you see, this is a sensor response for a two sensor array. Now, even very low concentration of nitric oxide, 7 parts per billion, we get a sensor response, but it is very, very less. Response is 0.2 millivolt. And for 10 sensor array, the signal improves, and it is 10 times than two sensor array. So this kind of sensor, so as it is very sensitive, means its sensitivity, we can detect 7 parts per billion. So we can use this kind of sensor for breath monitoring applications. So this is the 10 sensor array sample, and its length is 6 centimeters, and the same kind of sensors made by NASA people for space applications. So they miniaturize it, and this is 15 sensor array, and that's dimension is 2 centimeters. So very, very small. So here I can show the breath measurement, breath analysis experiment. So we have sensors over here. This is a furnace. Now, basically, these kind of sensors, you have to keep it at high temperature, around 400 degrees centigrade temperature. So that's why you have put it in furnace. Now here is the breath samples. So breath sample passes through a moisture trap, then passes through a pump, then a filters. So filter and then comes to the sample chambers. Because why you put a moisture trap? Because in our human breath, 90% or 90 to 95%, we have water vapors, means moistures in our human breath. So those kind of moistures will affect the sensor response. That's why we put a moisture trap, and that moisture trap generally put in dry ice conditions. That means minus 20 degrees centigrade temperature. So all water molecules, water will be frozen. So only nitric oxides and others gases present in our breath can pass through the pump, and this filter that will only allow the nitric oxides, and we can detect it. So this is the measurement setup. So this is the bag where you can put your breath inside the bag. Now this is the response, the breath response from 20 sensor arrays with breath samples. And interestingly, it shows high sensitivity. It shows high sensitivity. And here I would like to mention that based on this technology, so one startup company, they make a device. So this is the device, Phenom Pro, that can measure the nitric oxide concentrations in our human breath. Also now I think it's commercially available. Now another sensor that is called Niox Bharat, that is Swiss-based company. They also detect nitric oxide concentrations in human breath. So these are the handheld nitric oxide sensors available at market. So the importance of this kind of sensors, so you can monitor yourself. The most interesting thing is that suppose you have affected asthma, but you don't know whether you are asthmatic patients or other patients. So you have to go to some pathology and you have to do some rigorous tests, and sometimes those tests are very expensive, and sometimes the facility is not in your doorstep. So if you have this kind of device, so you can detect your health conditions by yourself. So now, but there are also problems with the device, because those devices are also a little bit expensive, and so now people are also working on the nanometric speed device. Hope those will be less expensive and more miniaturized, and that can be integrated with watch or cell phone in future. So now we'll discuss about health monitoring using glucose sensors. So already diabetes is a dreadful disease, and so if basically diabetic, according to whose definitions, means World Health Organizations. So for normal healthy persons, that sugar level is, blood sugar is 6.1 millimole per liters or 110 milligram per deciliters. But for diabetes people, so but blood glucose level is more than 7 millimole per liter or 126 milligram per deciliters. So if blood glucose increases, it creates a lot of problems like strokes, skin problems, means visual disturbance. Also, high blood glucose can create cataract and glaucomia. So already a little bit, or we can know that, and we are aware of that. So also it can damage blood vessels. And more striking thing is that in our country, so diabetes patients increasing day by day. So here in 2015, 415 million people are affected with diabetes. And in India, 2018, 77 million people are affected. And the second most affected in the world after China, and it projected 134 millions by 2035. So here are some report from the Hindu, and India is 75 millions in 2019, so diabetic patients, and age group is also we may worry because 20 to 79 years peoples, and number of people is 75 millions. So now how we can treat diabetes? Basically, for the treatment of diabetes, we need regular monitoring of glucose, and we have to take medicines and control our diet. So, but if we have some glucose monitoring systems, and it can give you regular information about your blood glucose conditions, then it will be helpful to monitor such kind of dreadful disease. So here we have made the glucose sensors for using some electrochemical methods. So electrochemical glucose sensor has several advantages. So it is easy to operate, and is high accuracy. It's a low cost, high sensitivity and stability, and it's free from interference. Now there are two kinds of electrochemical glucose sensor present. That is enzyme-based sensor. So there is some enzyme like glucose oxidase, and another is non-enzymatic. So here there will be no enzyme. But problem with that enzymatic sensors, so enzymes are not stable. The most serious problem for enzymatic glucose sensing is the stability of enzymes, because due to the changes in humidity, temperature, and pH. And enzyme immobilization is another problem, and this is a complex and little bit expensive. So as we discussed earlier, the commercial glucometer, so those are enzyme-based glucose sensor. So here you see here, this is a strip, and in this strip, so this is the means you can't use it, means only one time you can use the strips. Here there is some enzyme coating, and you put your blood, and that sensor will detect and give the blood glucose concentrations. But again, this is a invasive in nature, so this is a painful. So we have to figure out how we can make a glucose sensors which will be non-invasive. So only the option that is, this is alternative is that, so glucose detections in blood fluid, like this body fluid like sweat, saliva, and tears, suitable alternative to blood glucose monitoring. So already it is well established that so if your blood glucose increases, the glucose in sweat, saliva, and as well as tears, those also increases. And also some people, they find some linear relations, the change of blood glucose with change of salivary glucose, sweat glucose, as well as tears glucose. So there's lots of research is going on. So now if we can detect the glucose from sweat, saliva, or tears, so we can get the glucose level in our blood. So that method would be a non-invasive and it would be non-painful. So here are the timelines of sensor development. Now, yes, so presently people are using a lot of smart sensors. So suppose here people use some contact lens, so that can put your eyes and that can detect glucose from your tears. People use some mouth guard based device, so that will put in your teeth, and you can get the glucose concentrations in your saliva. Or here you will have to use some patch. That patch can stick on your body, and when you will get sweat, then it can detect glucose level from that sweat samples, and it can be transferred to your cell phones. So basically, continuous people are working if they can find some sensors which can continuously monitor your glucose of your body in invasive way. Non-invasive way. So in recent days, so sensors are enzymatic, and blood glucose concentration is quite higher, 3 to 8 millimole. But in case of non-enzymatic, means in futures, our goal is to make a non-enzymatic based sensors and non-invasive. So if we make a non-invasive sensors, we have to concentrate on either saliva, tears samples. But in saliva or tear samples, the glucose concentration is very, very less, 20 to 200 micron. In tears is 100 to 300 microns. So here we have studied some transition metal oxide based non-enzymatic glucose sensors. So transition metal oxide, these have several advantages. So why first thing is that why we use nanomaterials? Because as we've seen earlier, nanomaterials have some interesting properties, but in case of sensing experiments, it has advantages that it has very high surface to volume ratio. That's why, so its catalytic activity is more compared to bulk material. So here's the advantages of transition metal oxides. It's an easy synthesis process, high surface to volume ratio, high catalytic activity, low cost, and high stability. So we have studied gold nanoparticle decorated copper oxide nanorods. So here we have grown copper oxide nanorods on FTO substrates. FTO is a conducting fluorine tin oxide substrates. Now, for that purpose, this is a chemical method. Just to spin coat some copper oxide seed layer, means first make a copper oxide nanoparticle, then is spin coat it on FTO coated substrates, then it put it some solutions containing copper nitrate and hexamethyl tetramine at 85 degrees centigrade temperatures. We got a beautiful vertical copper oxide nanorods, and we to enhance the glucose sensitivity, we deposited gold by photoreduction methods. So this is very simple methods. Just put these copper oxide nanorods in gold solution, 1 millimole gold solutions, and we shine with light. So this HAUCl4 reduced and gold nanoparticle deposited on nanowire surface. So we made 3 samples because CU1 is for 1 hour gold deposition, 2 is 2 hour gold depositions, and 3 is 3 hour gold depositions. So this is our microstructures, copper oxide nanorods, and this is gold deposited copper oxide nanorods. And copper oxide nanorods are crystallines with monoclinic structures. For sensing measurements, we use copper oxide and gold deposited copper oxide as a sensing electrodes and platinum as a counter electrodes. And the electrolyte solution is 0.1 mole sodium hydroxide, because as these are transitional metal oxide, so glucose detections is possible in basic medium. So these are the cyclic voltammetry results, and we see, and for this first curve, we see that FTO does not show any response, but copper oxide and gold coated copper oxide shows response. So in the middle, this one, we have seen that that after additions of 10 millimole glucose, only copper oxide and gold deposited copper oxide shows higher current. So blue curve is gold deposited copper oxide, but that FQ does not give any response. Interestingly, gold deposited copper oxide shows more current compared to pristine copper oxide nanorods. So that is because it's higher electrocatalytic activity towards glucose detections. So here we have studied glucose CV response with various amount of glucose. Now this is the mechanisms. In fact, glucose becomes gluconolactones, and it hydrolyzed, became gluconoic acids, and it gives electron to the FTO, that's copper oxide nanorods. That's why the current increases. And in case of gold copper oxide nanorods, that golds also take part in that reactions, and it's also donate electron to the nanorods. So that's why it has a higher current compared to copper oxide nanorods. So now we have studied the continuous detection of glucose. Here, this is the IT curve, and this is the calibration curve. Calibration curve means current density versus glucose concentrations, and we got sensitivity in case of copper oxide nanorods. This is 1331 micromole, 300 micromole per centi square per millimole, and it's a linear range is 5 micromole to 1.325 micromoles. But in case of gold decorated copper oxides, it 2000s, 9 microampere per semi square per millimoles. So after gold loading, the sensitivity of copper oxide nanorod electrodes has been increased 1.5 times higher than pristine copper oxide nanorods. So we have also studied the interference effect. So interference effect means, so suppose you want to measure the glucose concentrations in saliva or blood, but in saliva or blood you don't have only glucose, there are other compounds are there, and other chemicals are materials are materials are there, so they can interfere with your sensors. So you have to selectively detect those particular glucose irrespective to other materials. That is called selectivity of the sensors. So this is the selectivity measurements. So here we have huge 0.1 mole ascorbic acid, dopamine, urea, uric acids. So those kind of sucrose, those kind of molecules or chemicals present inside our human blood. So here you see in the glucose, its response is from here to there, but when we add some other interfering agents, there is no such a change. So that's why this sensor is highly selective towards glucose, and it is also highly stable. And after 1 month's use, so only 10% decrease of sensor current. So this is highly sensitive, highly stable, and also it is highly response time is very fast, 1.6 seconds. So here are detection of glucose in human saliva. So we collect human saliva from different volunteers, and so we don't know, because we could not collect saliva from diabetic peoples. So that's why we simulated saliva at different concentrations. So we add glucose at different concentrations in a saliva collected from healthy people. So that is simulated saliva. So here you see, this is the raw saliva. We added 100 micromoles. So there are nice response. Now if we use 5 micromole glucose, so here you increases. So this is 25, this is 50 micromole glucose. So this is increases. So that's response clearly indicates that gold coated copper oxide nanorod can be used for salivary glucose detection. So here you see the calibration curve. That means that changing current density with glucose concentrations. So this is a linear relations, and the sensitivity of that gold coated copper oxide nanorod is 1700 microampere per centimeters per millimole. So next we have used copper oxide nanostructures, porous copper oxide nanostructures. So for that, the method is we have used different method to make porous copper oxide. So this is first we take a zinc oxide nanorods and we deposited copper oxide nanoparticles, and in the reaction chamber, what happens, that zinc oxide dissolves, and because that acidic solution zinc oxide dissolves and only copper oxides present. So it creates a porous structures, and these porous structures is attractive for salivary glucose sensing experiments. So here the CV response. We can see this is the CV response after additions of 10 micromole glucose. So this is black one is F2O, it has no response. So zinc oxide is also don't show any response, but copper oxides, it shows that curve response. Most interestingly, the porous copper oxide shows very high current compared to others. So here the similar IT response, and we get this is the calibration curve. So here we got two different regions. So here this is a linear up to 5 micromole to, that is 0.005 millimole to 0.225 millimole, one region, and another 0.225 to 0.825 millimole. And the sensitivity of those sensors is quite higher than the earlier gold coated samples. So this is 3072 microampere per millimole per semi-squares, and other yeah. So next, actually, yes, we have quiz sessions.
So, sir, is it open, Dr. Subra?
Just 1 minute. So I take now 10 minutes to finish this.
Okay.
So
Yeah, we are running
some
late.
students. Yeah. So now these sensors also shows excellent sensitivity towards salivary glucose detections. So now this is the raw saliva. This is 5 micromole glucose added saliva, and here we can get the sensitivity 2299 microampere per semi-square per millimole. Just the same, just here, just I take 5 minutes only these slides. So this is, we also studied from porous nickel oxide nanostructures. So here they are the nickel oxides nanostructures, and porous nanomaterials have an advantage because it has more surface area than some other nanostructures, and as it has more surface area, so the catalytic activity is more. So that's why we get higher sensing response. So here I can show you. So this is the response, a sensing response for salivary glucose detections. So this is the best results from the last two samples. So here the sensitivity is 2432 micromole per microampere per semi-squares per millimole. And more importantly, we have conducted another experiments. So this is interesting results. So here you see we have compare the sensor, our sensor response and commercially available glucometers, and we have collected glucose from saliva samples from 3 volunteers before and after dinners. So black one is empty stomach and red one is after meals. So this is for 3 volunteers, and interestingly we have seen, so after meal, the glucose concentrations in saliva increases. So already we know that, and here the sensor response, the current in the change in current density after addition of 100 micromole saliva. This is for empty stomachs, and this is after dinners. Now the blood glucose levels from this commercially available glucometer, that is empty stomach, is 94 milligram per deciliters, and after dinner is 137 milligram per deciliters. So it increases after meal, and interestingly, it's also increases in our sensor response from salivary glucose samples. So these results clearly shows the correlations between the glucose levels in blood as well as our saliva samples. But we need to get more results. We have to test the sensor response for more and more people. So we have also used some commercially available electrodes. So this is also shows good sensor response, and so our study shows that metal oxide, transitional metal oxide semiconductor nanostructures could be used for non-invasive salivary glucose detections in futures. So in summary, we have discussed some basic aspects of fundamentals of nanometrics and their applications. We have discussed non-invasive sensors and their importance. We discussed nitric oxides sensors and breath analysis and its importance for early asthma detections, and future perspective of glucose sensors for continuous and non-invasive diabetes monitoring. And we have also discussed the potential use of transitional metal oxide semiconductors for salivary glucose detections. So thanks you all. Also,
Yeah, thank you,
for your
Dr.
patience.
Subro, for your nice talk. You can ask question to Dr. Subro directly. You can unmute yourself and you can ask the question now.
Yeah,
I had already shared the feedback link as well as test link in your chat box. Please go to the chat box and give your feedback as well as test. In the meantime, you can ask the question, Dr. Subro.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, Dr. Varma, it was a very nice presentation. Thank you very much. I have one question for you. That is, you have seen in one of your slides that there is a breath sensing mechanism is there. So can you please show me that once again, such that I can describe my question?
Okay. So then I have to actually have to share slide again.
Yes, there is a pump after the filter.
Yeah.
So my question is that, as you know, yes.
I am showing the slides. Huh?
Okay.
Yeah. So
yes, after the moisture trap, there is a pump. So as you know already that the whatever the breath sample it is coming, that is the concentration or the amount of it is very low. So what is the thing you are pumping? I mean, as the amount of air, whatever the breath sample it is coming after the moisture trap, the amount is very low. So, how the pump does work?
Yeah, thanks for these questions, because thing is that this pump is not rotary or like that kind of pump. So this is a very small pump, and its flow rate is very less. Means suppose 50 milliliter per minute, like that.
Okay.
So flow rate of the pump is very, very less. Means this kind of pump is available in the market. So they are called sampling pump, air sampling pump. So
Okay.
generally, people
Kind of
use those
syringe
kind
pump?
of.
Is it a syringe pump? Is it a kind of syringe pump?
Syringe pumps, I don't know, but this is just like a normal pump, but flow rate
Okay.
is very, very less.
Okay.
I think, ma'am, I just adding the comment to Dr. Subha. I think this pump is giving your flow in one direction. Is it?
Okay.
Yeah,
Am I
yeah,
correct?
pump will give, yeah, it will give one direction.
So that air can pass to the sensor. Am I correct? I am not sure. Dr. Subra can just respond.
Yeah. So basically, pump collect air from the breath sample bags, and then they put it in the sample chamber. Just it works like a mass flow controller. Means in mass flow controllers, in one side you have high pressure gas, and that controller flow the flow rate. And here, in fact, in these things that you can change the flow rate of the pump also. So there is options.
So just I'm taking one more minute. That is after PTY filter. So we want to sense the natural, I mean, in ppb level. So just after the PTY filter, our objective is to find the NO. I mean the concentration of the NO. What is the concentration of the nitrogen oxide? So thing is that I want to know that the whatever the gas is coming at the sensor chamber. So is there any gas chromatography result, or have you, I mean, just I want to know regarding
comparison
this, because is that whatever the output of the PTY filter, have you seen in gas chromatography result that there is a NO is around that, I mean the concentration of that NO is after the output of the PTY filter is this?
Okay. Yeah, actually we have cross-checked with different methods. So here you see, so this sensor response, basically as I earlier discussed, this instrument, that is nitric oxide analyzer. This is very high sensitive nitric oxide analyzer.
Talking about these things.
We have cross-checked with that instruments.
Yes. Nice, very nice work. Thank you. Thank you for it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Acharya. Is there any other questions?
Hello. Hello, sir. Good evening. I must thank that your presentation is very nice and enjoyable. I thank you very much. Sir, I just would like to know what is the operating temperature for that solid state sensor you mentioned about the Yttria stabilized zirconia based sensor for monitoring NOx.
Yeah, this is around 400 degrees centigrade.
100 degrees centigrade?
No, 400.
Oh, 400. Okay, 400. Sir. I just would like to know, and how it is achieve the selectivity, sir?
Yeah,
is there any mechanism behind that?
Yeah, actually here I didn't put that slides. So already it's established methods. And this sensor is highly selective to any kind of hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, and other gases also. Other gases also. Because already this same kind of sensors using combustion engines.
Okay.
So, and
please, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah. So already tested, and we have seen the no response with hydrocarbons as well as carbon monoxides.
Okay, sir. Actually, this question is why? Because I've seen some research articles that is tungsten oxide used as a working electrode, and one famous scientist from Japanese, Mishra, that Noria Moira et al. I read that paper the tungsten oxide is more sensitive to hydrogen sulfide rather than any other gases. Yeah, I get to know the curiosity.
So,
I just
thing is that's why the beauty is that here we have used that platinum zeolite.
Yeah.
So that basically show you exactly how it's a one is platinum filter and another here
Okay.
we have used platinum loaded zeolite. So those two things
Okay.
means methanes. Look at our publications. Means,
Okay.
you can see that means already it is established.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And also one more question, sir. I just would like to know, is there any sensor, you mentioned about the breath analyzer. Is there any sensor available for monitoring ulcer through non-invasive technique? Because, if ulcer patient, having some issue, that bad smell coming, even though they have a brush in the morning.
Yeah, means you are saying
Just
commercially
the
available?
information, information I would like to get from you, sir. This is not a question actually.
No. Actually, this is very, very difficult
Okay.
to get those kind of things. Now people are trying to work with some lung cancers, as well as some breast cancers also. So, but till now it is in lab, but I didn't get any commercial device.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thanks for a nice presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Suresh. So, is there any other questions? We can take another last question, maybe, if any. Else we can. We are going to thank speaker, Dr. Subhra Mondal.
So, good evening, sir.
Yes.
This is Anandraj.
Your voice is not audible, Anandraj, sir.
1 second. Is it audible, sir? Now?
Yes, now better.
Yeah.
I just want to have a clarity on the step current density change in sugar test.
Yes. So
can you just give the explanation?
Yeah, I can. So basically, you want salivary samples or only glucose sample, normal test?
Glucose, sir. Glucose.
Only glucose.
Yes, sir. There is a step change in the current appears, sir.
So this step change in the current.
Yes.
So that is due to the oxidation of glucose in the sensors electrodes, sensing electrodes.
Okay, sir. What is the potential you keep to? Whether the potential is kept constant or you are varying the?
No. We have kept potential constant because I didn't show here. So we have studied at different potentials, and we use the optimum potentials, and that optimum potential constant for all experiments.
Okay, sir. You are maintaining the potential, and it oxidizes of its own duration of the time.
Yeah.
So, thank you, sir.
Okay. So thank you, Dr. Subhra. I'd like to request Dr. Kaustubh Das to give concluding remarks and vote of thanks to us for this day.
Okay, I thank Dr. Mondal for this fascinating talk. So basically, he has covered a vast area starting from the very basic science of nanomaterial properties to different techniques of growing various nanostructures in details. And finally, he has touched some of their applications and mainly focused on the sensor application in which he has an expertise. So I think all of us has get inspiration from his talk. So he has shared important informations also in the field of non-invasive sensing technique, which is very interesting to us, and mainly how breath analysis and electrochemical glucose sensor can be so important to our health monitoring. So I think his talk is so well organized that it is surely inspiring the young scientist, and also we all have enjoyed it. So thank you very much, Dr. Subhra. So thank you.
Thank you.